So I don't know what this looks like, but what it's supposed to be is peaks of mountains and then valleys, and they're supposed to be, let's see if I created the right number, they're supposed to be 7. Okay, there are. So, when you read Conference of the Birds, you'll have no idea that this is the structure of the whole book. You could read the whole book and never know that this is the structure, because the book's made up of all these stories and fables, and there's a larger narrative about a bunch of birds trying to get to the end. So you'll get the sense that there's a linear structure, but underneath it, sort of like kind of carved into it, that if you were super knowledgeable, you would know that it was happening, are these 7 valleys. And think of the valleys as sort of spiritual problems that one encounters in moving towards enlightenment. So the first valley is called the search, or the quest. And lessons of love. I like that that's a valley, like learning about love and all the ways that it can get weird. And then this one is about mystical experiences and all the things that you can learn from mystical experiences, sort of insight that you have. And then the fourth one, which I think should be further along, but it's not, is detachment. So when you're in this valley, you're learning how to sort of detach from people and institutions and all that. Then number 5 is about unity, how everything kind of coalesces into one. And this one is the most confusing to me, I have to admit. Like, you're close to enlightenment and you hit bewilderment. It's bewilderment, and then some people use the word wonderment, but I actually like bewilderment better. And what I think is kind of interesting is that you go such a long way, you've like mastered detachment, you've mastered the idea that we're all connected and we're all the same, and then you get bewildered. And I'm sort of curious about what that means. And then the 7th is when the sense of self gets annihilated. That sounds fairly negative, so I will call this fulfillment. But it is sort of the coming together with God. So, Conference of the Birds is about 30 birds of different kinds that you will recognize for the most part. They represent different kinds of people, different weaknesses, different strengths, and it's about their journey from this point. And as you follow the narrative, they're going to get to fulfillment. I can't remember if they all get there or not. It's been a while since I read the same thing. Now, the book excerpts certain parts, and I just want you to know it's from like early on in the narrative. So I don't know if it's exactly there, but it's from this part. So the stories that you're reading about the sheikh come about here, and so there's a long journey that the birds have to go on. So that, I think, is useful to you to know that this is an early story and what's going to happen. Now, when you read this, you would never have to know that this story, like, it's just because you're reading a story about unity, you may or may not know it's about unity. because it may be a love story as well. So it may partially feel like we're back here in Lessons of Love. So even though this is a linear progression, I actually don't experience it as, oh, now we're entering mystical experiences, and now we're leaving behind Lessons of Love. I think that sometimes, like the Kubler-Ross's stages of death, kind of grieving and anger and denial and all that, that there's a little bit of all of these in each story. So it's both, and that would make sense. If it's really about unity, then each story would kind of contain the whole. So don't pay attention to this so much. There's a group of Indian poems written over hundreds and hundreds of years called Bhakti poetry, and it also does the same thing. Like, if you're really, really into Bhakti poetry, you can situate it in a particular stage, but you can also read all of the poems and never know where they fit in this progressive way of looking at the world. So I just wanted you to know, well, first of all, it's important that the birds start here and they're trying to get somewhere. And if you read the entire book, you would end up at the end. But beyond that, if you were way into Sufi thought, you would be very aware, I think, of going through these different stages. And you could see these different stages in the stories. Okay? I think that's all I kind of want to tell you. Let me just look at my notes. Oh, I forgot a couple things. So just because I've kind of mapped them out as taking up equals amount of space, in actuality, this part in the book takes up a greater amount of space. And let's say that, so this may be like 150, the book's not that long. This may be like 78 pages, and this part may be 12 pages. So, not all stages get the same amount of attention, at least in number of pages. The other thing I want to say is that, of course, Conference of the Birds is written by Attar, and he is one of 3 major Sufi writers that people read in the West. Rumi, who we hopefully will read this term, is another one. And someone who I don't teach anymore, but I used to, Hafiz, is another. And these are like the 3 big, like this is the canon, the Sufi canon that you as students in the U.S. could at some point come across. And of course there's zillions of more writers, but these are the 3 that we pay attention to. And he's the oldest in terms of linear progression. And I think that's it. I feel like there's one more thing. 30 birds. And I kind of said this already, is that you're going to read a very sort of realistic sounding, it's like 20 pages of a fairly realistic sounding poem. But then it could be followed by a fable. Like, what you're reading is not going to be a fable. But the genre of what you read throughout changes. So just know that Conference of the Birds sort of pulls in various genres, and it is mixed up in that way. Okay? I would urge you to read the whole thing at some point in your life. We don't have time for it. We're just going to read a little snippet.